Amelia seems to have the perfect life with her husband David, but cracks begin to show as she becomes drawn to Eric, a charming colleague. As the emotional distance between her and David grows, she finds herself entangled in a web of betrayal, guilt, and impossible choices. When David finally discovers the truth, everything she's built with him begins to unravel, torn between the comfort of Eric and the wreckage of her marriage. Amelia must confront her deepest mistakes. Will she be able to win David back? Or has she destroyed everything she holds dear? Watch until the end to find out. The summer of 2016 was one of those postcard-perfect seasons in the coastal town of Clearwater Bay. The kind of summer where the sun painted the streets golden, and the salty breeze carried the faint echoes of laughter from the beachfront. But for Amelia and David, the picture-perfect facade hid cracks that neither of them wanted to admit were growing deeper. Amelia was the kind of woman you couldn't help but admire. From a distance, vibrant, ambitious, and endlessly curious, she had a way of lighting up every room she walked into. A marketing manager at a boutique advertising firm, her days were filled with creative pitches and late-night brainstorming sessions that often spilled over into glasses of wine with her team. She thrived on the energy, the challenge, and most of all, the recognition. David, on the other hand, was her polar opposite, steady, dependable, and content with the quieter rhythms of life. An architect with a deep love for craftsmanship, he spent his days bringing intricate designs to life and his evenings sketching new ideas in the cozy nook of their shared apartment. For him, success wasn't about accolades, but about creating something lasting, something that mattered. Their relationship had started like a whirlwind, fueled by the electricity of their differences. David had been drawn to Amelia's spark, her unapologetic passion for life. She, in turn, had found comfort in his steadiness, the quiet anchor he provided in a world that often felt too chaotic. They balanced each other, or so they believed. By the time their second anniversary rolled around, life had started to shift. David's work had taken on a demanding project, one that kept him at the office late into the night and often spilled into weekends. Amelia, meanwhile, was climbing the ranks at her firm, her star rising with every successful campaign she helmed. They told themselves it was just a phase, that the long hours and late nights would pay off in the end. But those long hours came at a cost. Their once effortless conversations grew shorter, punctuated by distracted nods and half-hearted smiles. Amelia would come home to find David hunched over his drafting table, too absorbed in his work to notice the new dress she'd bought or the story she was eager to share. And David, in turn, began to feel like a ghost in his own home, overshadowed by Amelia's ever-growing social circle and her vibrant, relentless energy. It wasn't that they stopped loving each other, not entirely. It was more like they were drifting, pulled apart by the currents of their separate lives. And in those moments of distance, something else began to take root. Amelia first met Eric at a networking event hosted by her firm. He was charming in a way that seemed effortless, his easy laughter and quick wit drawing her in from the moment they were introduced. Eric was the regional director of a partner agency, a man with a reputation for closing deals as easily as he broke hearts. Amelia knew his type: cocky, self-assured, the kind of man who never heard the word no. But there was something about him that intrigued her, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Their first conversation was harmless enough: small talk about the industry, a few shared laughs over the uninspired hors d'oeuvres. But as the weeks went by, their paths crossed more frequently. Emails about collaborative projects turned into late-night phone calls. Their professional rapport giving way to something more personal. Amelia told herself it was nothing, just the kind of camaraderie that often developed in their line of work. But deep down, she knew better. David, for his part, began to notice the changes in Amelia, even if he couldn't quite put them into words. She seemed distracted, her laughter a little too forced, her smiles not quite reaching her eyes. She started coming home later, blaming work dinners and networking events. When he asked if everything was okay, she brushed him off with a reassuring smile that felt more like a wall than an answer. The truth was, Amelia didn't know how to explain what she was feeling. Eric made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. He noticed the little things. The way her voice softened when she talked about her favorite campaigns. The way her eyes lit up when she was on the verge of a great idea. And while she knew it wasn't right, she found herself drawn to him, to the way he made her feel alive. One night, as David worked late in his studio, Amelia sat in their living room, scrolling through her phone. A message from Eric lit up the screen, a simple question about an upcoming project. She hesitated for a moment before replying, her fingers moving faster than her thoughts. Their conversation flowed easily, seamlessly, as it always did, but this time it was different. This time, Eric's words were laced with something more, a flirtation that was impossible to ignore. And instead of shutting it down, Amelia let it happen. That night, as she lay in bed next to David, she couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at her. She told herself it was harmless, that it didn't mean anything, but deep down, she knew she was standing at the edge of a precipice, one step away from a fall she might not be able to recover from. And as the days turned into weeks, that precipice grew closer. The days that followed were a blur for Amelia, a tangled web of work obligations, stolen glances at her phone, and a growing sense of unease she couldn't shake. Eric's messages had gone from professional to personal, from friendly to suggestive, and Amelia found herself replying more often than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was innocent, just a distraction. But deep down, she knew she was treading dangerous ground. David, meanwhile, was retreating further into his work. He could feel the distance between him and Amelia like a physical weight, but he didn't know how to bridge the gap. Every attempt to connect seemed to fall flat. A few nights ago, he'd suggested they have a quiet dinner at their favorite restaurant, the one where they'd celebrated their first anniversary. Amelia had smiled and agreed, but when the night came, she cancelled, claiming she had to stay late for a client meeting. The truth was, she wasn't at the office. She was at a rooftop bar across town, sharing drinks and laughter with Eric. She hadn't planned it. It was supposed to be a quick after-work meetup to go over some campaign details, but one drink turned into 2, then 3, and before she knew it, they were sitting closer than they should have been. Eric's hand brushing against hers as he leaned in to make a joke. Amelia felt a rush of guilt as she glanced at her phone and saw David's text asking how her meeting was going. She quickly typed out a reply, "Just wrapping up, see you soon," and slipped her phone back into her purse. Eric noticed her hesitation and raised an eyebrow, a small, knowing smirk playing on his lips. "Trouble at home?" he asked casually, his tone light but probing. "No," Amelia replied quickly, too quickly. "It's nothing, just my husband checking in." Eric nodded, his expression unreadable, but his next words lingered in her mind long after she left. "Well, for what it's worth, you deserve to be with someone who really sees you." That night, as Amelia walked through the door of the apartment, she found David asleep on the couch, an open sketch pad resting on his chest. She paused, watching him for a moment, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions she couldn't untangle. She wanted to reach out, to close the distance between them, but the guilt she carried felt like a wall she couldn't break through. The following week, the tension between them reached a breaking point. It started with something small. David had forgotten to pick up groceries, and Amelia snapped at him, her frustration spilling over in a way that surprised even her David, tired and worn down, snapped back. And before they knew it, they were locked in a heated argument, their voices rising in a way they never had before. "I don't know what's going on with you lately, Amelia," David said, his tone sharp, "but it feels like you're not even here anymore, like you've already checked out." "Maybe I have," Amelia shot back before she could stop herself. The words hung in the air, heavy, and irreversible. David stared at her, his expression a mix of hurt and disbelief. What's that supposed to mean? Amelia hesitated, the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. She wanted to tell him, to let it all out, but she couldn't bring herself to say the words. Instead, she turned away, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, I don't know. In the days that followed, the silence between them was deafening. David buried himself in his work, coming home later and later, while Amelia found herself spending more time with Eric, their interactions growing increasingly intimate. She knew it was wrong, knew she was crossing lines she could never uncross. But she couldn't seem to stop herself. One evening, as David sat alone in his studio, sketching absent-mindedly, he noticed something that stopped him cold. Amelia's phone, left on the counter, lit up with a notification. It wasn't the notification itself that caught his attention. It was the name Eric. David froze, a sinking feeling settling in his chest. He didn't want to look, didn't want to know, but something compelled him to pick up the phone. The message was innocuous enough, a casual, thinking about you. But the familiarity in the words sent a wave of nausea through him. He put the phone down, his hands trembling, and sat back, staring at the sketchpad in front of him. The lines he'd been drawing blurred together as his mind raced, piecing together moments and details he'd dismissed before Amelia's late nights. Her distracted demeanor, the way she always seemed to be somewhere else. The next morning, David confronted her. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed the storm raging inside him. Who's Eric? Amelia froze, her heart pounding. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Amelia, David said, his tone firmer now. I deserve the truth. Who is he? She hesitated, torn between the urge to deny and the need to confess. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her guilt. He's a colleague. We've been working closely on a few projects. David nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. And nothing, she said quickly, too quickly. It's nothing, David, I swear. But he didn't believe her. He could see it in her eyes, hear it in the way her voice wavered. The trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Over the next few weeks, the tension in their home became unbearable. Amelia threw herself deeper into her work and into her connection with Eric, while David began to withdraw, his once steady presence replaced by a quiet, simmering anger. The love they'd built over the years felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the growing chasm between them. One evening, as Amelia was getting ready for yet another late-night meeting, David stopped her at the door. I don't know what's going on with us, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. But I can't keep doing this. We need to figure this out, Amelia, before it's too late. She looked at him, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. But instead of staying, instead of trying to fix what was broken, she turned and walked out the door, leaving him standing alone in the dim light of their apartment. As Amelia stepped into the cool night air, she felt a pang of regret, but she pushed it aside. She told herself there was still time to make things right, but deep down, she knew the choices she was making were leading her further away from the life she'd once cherished. And as she drove toward the bar where Eric was waiting, she couldn't help but wonder how much further she would fall before she finally hit the bottom. If you're enjoying this story and want to see where it goes next, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more stories that dive deep into the complexities of love, betrayal, and the choices we make. The night had grown colder as Amelia arrived at the bar, her thoughts swirling with doubt and confusion. Eric was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 glasses of wine in front of him, his presence commanding. As she walked in, their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, Amelia wondered if this was really where she wanted to be. But the pull of something familiar, something easy, kept her feet moving toward him. "Hey," he greeted, his smile easy, his voice smooth. There was no trace of the tension that had started to crack her life in two. In his presence, everything felt uncomplicated. For the first time in days, she felt as though she could breathe. But even as she sat down, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something dangerous. The words David had said to her that morning still echoed in her ears. "We need to figure this out, Amelia, before it's too late." She met Eric's gaze, forcing a smile as she reached for the glass of wine. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, trying to sound casual, though the guilt in her chest was undeniable. "No problem," Eric replied, his voice low and confident. "I thought you might need a distraction after everything. You've been a little distant lately." She raised an eyebrow at his comment, her heart skipping a beat. How did he know had she been that obvious? She quickly pushed the thought aside. She was here now, and there was no turning back. "Yeah, work's been crazy," she muttered, swirling the wine in her glass. "Just trying to keep everything from falling apart." Eric leaned in slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to do it all alone. You know I'm here." His hand brushed against hers on the table, and the warmth of his touch sent an electric jolt through her. Amelia's breath hitched, and for a second, she almost let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, Eric could fill the void she had felt in her marriage for so long. She was so tired of pretending, so tired of trying to be everything for David when it felt like he couldn't even see her anymore. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed in her bag. Amelia stiffened, her stomach turning. She knew it was David. She could feel it. With shaky hands, she pulled the phone from her purse, glancing at the screen. Her pulse quickened. "David?" Eric asked, his voice suddenly serious, his gaze following her every movement. Amelia hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't know how to explain this to him. How could she explain the weight of her actions? How could she face David when every choice she made seemed to push him further away? Taking a deep breath, Amelia slid the phone across the table. "It's David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He wants to talk." Eric's eyes softened, but only for a moment. He shrugged and picked up the phone, reading the message for a few seconds. "What's he saying?" he asked, handing it back to her. Amelia stared at the screen, her stomach sinking with every word. "Where are you?" it read. "We need to talk." She felt a pang of guilt, her hand shaking as she typed a quick response, telling David she would be home soon. As she set the phone back down, Eric's hand slid back over hers, a silent, almost possessive gesture that sent a chill down her spine. "Don't let him pull you back in," Eric said, his voice soft but firm. "You deserve more than that, Amelia." She didn't know what to say. She couldn't deny that Eric had become a source of comfort for her, but something inside her was beginning to twist. Was this really who she was now? Was this all she had left to hold on to? "I should go," Amelia said, standing up abruptly. Her mind was spinning, and she couldn't stay here anymore. She needed to face the reality that was waiting for her at home. She needed to confront the truth, whatever that might be. Eric stood as well, his expression unreadable. He didn't try to stop her, but there was something in his eyes that made her hesitate for just a moment. "I'll be here when you're ready," he said quietly, his voice heavy with unspoken promises. Amelia nodded, forcing a smile, and turned to leave. The drive home was a blur. Every streetlight seemed to pass in slow motion, casting long shadows across her mind. Her phone buzzed again, and she didn't need to check to know it was David. The message was simple. We need to talk, Amelia, now. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, the weight of everything pressing down on her. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw the light in the living room flickering, the door ajar, just as it always was when David was home. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like the threshold of something final. Stepping inside, Amelia was greeted by the silence of the apartment. David was there, sitting on the couch, his face drawn and tired. The moment their eyes met, Amelia knew this conversation couldn't wait any longer. There was no avoiding it. "Amelia," David said, his voice low, almost like he was testing the waters. "We need to talk." She nodded, unable to speak. She stood in front of him, her mind racing for the right words, but all that came out was a shaky breath. David studied her for a long moment, as if trying to read her. "I know something's going on, Amelia. I don't know what, but I can feel it, and I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. So, please just tell me the truth." Her heart hammered in her chest. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, but she knew she couldn't. She had to face this. She had to face the destruction she had set in motion. "I've been seeing someone else," Amelia whispered, her voice breaking. "Eric. He's been there for me, and I've been leaning on him." David's face fell. His expression didn't change, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. You're telling me this now?" His voice was steady, but his hands were trembling. "I didn't want to hurt you, David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt so lost, so alone." David stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "How long, Amelia? How long has this been going on?" "A few months," she admitted, the words slipping out of her mouth before she could stop them. "I never meant for it to get this far." David turned away from her, running a hand through his hair. He looked like he was fighting to keep it together. "A few months," he repeated, as if the words were a physical blow. "And you didn't think to tell me, you didn't think to come to me?" "I was scared," Amelia said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to make it stop." David turned back to face her, his expression a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. "You didn't know how to fix it. You cheated, Amelia. You didn't think about fixing it. You thought about running away." Her chest tightened as the weight of his words hit her. She had no defense. She had no excuses. She had only her guilt, and it was overwhelming. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you. You mean everything to me, David." But David just shook his head, taking a step back. "No, Amelia, you've already hurt me, and I don't know if I can come back from this." The silence that followed was suffocating. Amelia felt like she was drowning, caught in the heavy silence of everything they hadn't said and everything they couldn't take back. If you're enjoying this intense story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more twists, turns, and heart-wrenching moments. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And stay tuned, because this story is just heating up. David didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, his back to her, staring out the window as the night deepened. The silence between them felt thick, suffocating. Every breath Amelia took seemed to echo louder in her ears as the weight of the confession settled over them. She had been afraid of this moment, but now that it was here, it felt worse than she could have imagined. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," David said quietly, his voice barely audible, like he was trying to make sense of the words himself. The finality in his tone was like a dagger to Amelia's chest. She stepped forward, reaching for him, but he took a step back, his expression hardening as he shook his head. "No, I don't want your apologies right now. I need some space." Amelia swallowed the lump in her throat. She had been prepared for anger, for pain, but the coldness in his voice was the hardest to bear. It was like everything that had once been warm between them had been drained away. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she whispered, her eyes welling with tears. "I didn't want to hurt you, David, I swear." He didn't meet her gaze. Instead, he glanced at the floor, the weight of his thoughts pulling him deeper into himself. After a long, heavy pause, he spoke again, but his voice sounded different, detached. "You should go. I think we both need some time to think." Amelia froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Go." The word echoed through her mind like a cruel joke. She had nowhere to go. She had built a life with David, and now he was telling her to leave. "I can't go," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please don't do this, I love you. I never stopped loving you." David's eyes flicked up to meet hers, and for a split second, she saw the pain behind his eyes, the struggle in his chest. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. "I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me," he said, his voice cracking slightly, though he quickly masked it. "I can't keep living in a relationship where I'm not enough for you." Amelia opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She had no defense. She had no excuses. Her heart was shattered, and she was standing there, empty, exposed, without the words that could make it right. She had destroyed everything, and now David was shutting her out. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, but it felt hollow, the apology unable to heal the rift between them. David walked to the door, pausing for a moment to collect himself. "I think you should leave, Amelia," he said again, his voice low but firm. He opened the door without waiting for her response, his back turned to her as if he was already mentally shutting down everything they had shared. The finality of it hit her hard. She had thought this moment might come, but now that it had, she felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. She stood there for a long time, her heart pounding, her chest tight with emotion. And then, in a quiet, defeated whisper, she spoke the words that would haunt her forever. "I'm sorry I never meant for any of this to happen." But David had already walked out the door, leaving her alone in their home. The days after that moment were a blur. Amelia stayed in the apartment, her body numb with shock, her mind racing, but unable to focus on anything other than the terrible silence that stretched between her and David. She couldn't bring herself to leave. She couldn't bring herself to go to Eric either, though he had been calling her non-stop, checking in, telling her that he was there for her. But she couldn't go to him. Not now. Not after what had happened with David. The apartment felt like a tomb. Every corner reminded her of a life she had lost. The couch where they had spent countless nights watching movies together. The kitchen table where they had shared so many meals. The bed they had once shared. Now feeling like a place of betrayal. The guilt was crushing Amelia. Had thought that stepping away from her marriage would solve her problems, would give her the space she needed to figure things out. But now she saw that the distance she had created had torn everything apart. David had been right. She had run away instead of facing their problems. And now, with him gone, it was too late to turn back. On the 5th night, after David had left, Amelia found herself standing outside the apartment building, staring up at the dimly lit windows. She had been sitting in her car for an hour, debating whether to go to him, to try to talk, to fix the mess she had made. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts, stopping at David's name. She stared at it for a long time, her thumb hovering over the call button. Should I call him? Her mind screamed yes, but her heart knew the answer was no. She couldn't force him to forgive her, couldn't make him understand the confusion and the mistakes that had led her here. But just as she was about to put the phone down, a message from Eric popped up. "I'm thinking about you. Let me know if you need to talk." Her fingers shook as she typed back a short response. I need to talk. Can we meet? The thought of Eric was a lifeline, a connection to something that felt easier, something she could control. But as she typed the message, a gnawing feeling deep in her gut told her that turning to him would be another mistake. Still, she sent the message. The next evening, they met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Eric was waiting for her at a corner table, looking just as he always did, confident, composed, as though nothing in the world could shake him. He greeted her with a soft smile as she sat down, and Amelia couldn't help but feel a pang of relief. She was here with someone who understood her in ways that David no longer did. How have you been? Eric asked gently, his tone casual, but his eyes scanning her face with interest. Amelia hesitated. She hadn't really thought about what to say. I don't know, she replied quietly. I don't even know where to start. Eric reached across the table, his hand brushing hers, the familiar warmth making her stomach flutter. Hey, it's okay. You don't need to explain everything right now. I'm here for you. For the first time in days, Amelia allowed herself to relax. She leaned into the comfort of his presence, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her shoulders. But for this moment, it didn't matter. Eric made her feel like she was seen, like she was someone worth caring for, and that made everything else seem just a little easier to bear. If you've made it this far, you've probably seen just how much pain and heartbreak Amelia is going through. If you want to see how this intense story unfolds, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your friends, and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't yet, subscribe for more gripping stories and emotional roller coasters. The evening with Eric ended without much fanfare. They had talked, but it wasn't the cathartic conversation Amelia had hoped for. It was more like two people sharing the same air, filling the space between them with fleeting words. She couldn't deny the chemistry they shared, but something felt off. It felt like she was seeking comfort in the wrong place, trying to distract herself from the painful reality she had to face. As she left the cafe, she checked her phone. There was another message from David. Just a single line. We need to talk tomorrow. Her stomach dropped. She had been hoping for some time to process everything, to sort out her emotions, but deep down, she knew that was a luxury she couldn't afford. Time was running out, and David was still there, waiting for her to make things right. But the fear gnawed at her. The fear of confronting the depth of the damage she had caused. Amelia spent the night pacing around her apartment, trying to gather the courage to go to him, to face the truth she had been avoiding. Her mind flashed back to their happier days, to the life they had built together before everything started to crumble. It was hard to reconcile the man she loved with the one she had betrayed. She couldn't understand how everything had gotten so tangled, how one mistake had spiraled out of control. At 9 a.m. the next morning, Amelia stood in front of David's apartment, staring at the door. She had spent the past hour debating whether she should go inside, but each time her hand hovered over the doorknob, she pulled back. She knew that David had every right to be angry, but what if he didn't want to listen? What if he was already too far gone? She knocked gently, holding her breath as she waited for a response. A moment later, the door opened, and there he was, David, looking tired and worn, but his expression unreadable. The moment their eyes met, Amelia felt a pang of guilt so deep, it almost took her breath away. She began, but her voice faltered, her words failing her. David stepped aside, silently motioning for her to come in. She hesitated before walking inside, feeling like an intruder in the space that had once been theirs. Sit down, David said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. He gestured toward the couch, and she obeyed, her heart hammering in her chest. David sat across from her, his arms crossed, his eyes hard as they locked onto hers. The silence between them stretched out for a moment. the weight of it crushing. "I don't know what to say to you, Amelia," David finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything has changed. I don't know who you are anymore." Her breath caught in her throat. "I'm still the same person, David. I swear I am. I've made terrible mistakes, but I'm still me." David shook his head. "David, I'm not sure I believe that. Anymore, I don't even know who you are when I look at you." The sting of his words hit harder than she expected. "I never meant to hurt you," she pleaded. I don't know how it all happened. I was lost, and I let myself get caught up in something I shouldn't have." David remained silent, his jaw clenched. Amelia could see the storm brewing inside him, the hurt and the anger threatening to boil over. "I was never enough for you, was I?" David finally asked, his voice breaking, but there was no anger in it, just exhaustion. "I've been working myself to the bone, trying to give you everything, and you turned to someone else." Amelia could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. She had never imagined it would get this bad. She had never imagined that she could hurt him like this. "No, David," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You were enough. But I was too busy to see that I was so caught up in my own world that I didn't see you slipping away." David shook his head again, his face contorted in frustration. "You don't get it, Amelia. It's not just about the betrayal. It's about everything that came before it. The fact that we couldn't talk. The fact that I couldn't even count on you anymore." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Amelia couldn't breathe. He was right. She had been blind to everything, to how much she had taken him for granted. She had let her own ambitions and insecurities build walls around her. And now she was standing there, trying to break them down with nothing but words. "I know I've messed up. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't undo," Amelia said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "But I want to make it right. I want to fight for us, for you." David's eyes softened for a split second, but just as quickly, the mask came back. "I don't know if I can forgive you. Not for this." Amelia's heart shattered. "Please, David, please don't say that." David stood up abruptly, walking toward the window, his back turned to her. The air between them felt heavy, suffocating. He stared outside, as if searching for something, anything, that would make sense of the chaos inside him. Finally, after a long silence, David spoke again. "I need to think. I need to figure out what comes next. I can't just pretend everything is okay, Amelia. I can't go back to pretending I'm the man you need me to be." Amelia swallowed hard. She wanted to say something, anything, that would change his mind, but she knew it wasn't that simple. She had already lost his trust. The damage had been done. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "if there's any part of you that still loves me, don't give up on us." David didn't turn to face her. He just stood there, staring out the window, lost in his thoughts. Amelia sat there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for him to say something, anything that could offer her hope. But when he finally spoke, it wasn't what she wanted to hear. "I can't promise anything, Amelia," he said quietly. "I need time, I need space, and I'm not sure I can ever go back to what we had." Her heart sank, and for the first time in their relationship, Amelia realized that this might be the end. There might be no way back. The air between them felt electric, like a storm on the verge of breaking. Amelia couldn't escape the reality of the situation. She had destroyed everything. And now, she was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had torn apart. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat, you know things are getting more intense. Don't forget to like, share, and comment below about your thoughts on this story, and make sure you subscribe for the next part of this emotional rollercoaster. Amelia left David's apartment feeling more broken than she had when she arrived. The weight of his words settled heavily on her chest, the distance between them now a gaping chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. She had never imagined that it would come to this, standing in front of him, begging for forgiveness, only to be met with silence and uncertainty. Her car was parked a few blocks away, but she couldn't bring herself to go home. The thought of returning to the empty space where they used to laugh and dream together felt suffocating. So instead, she drove aimlessly, the road ahead stretching out in front of her, just as her life seemed to stretch out. Empty, uncertain, and directionless. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know what she was searching for. And yet, when she found herself pulling into the parking lot of the same cafe where she had met Eric, she couldn't help but feel a strange pull. The last time she had been here, she had felt a flicker of connection, a brief escape from the spiraling mess of her life. Maybe it wasn't the right choice. Maybe it was a mistake. But at that moment, all she could think of was how desperate she was for some kind of relief, some place to turn where the weight of her choices wouldn't feel so heavy. As she walked through the door of the cafe, the familiar jingle of the bell overhead felt like an echo of a past life. Eric was sitting in his usual spot, the same casual confidence in his demeanor. He looked up when she entered, a smile playing at the corner of his lips. He had been waiting for her. "Amelia," he greeted, his voice smooth, as though nothing had changed. "I'm glad you came." She hesitated for a moment, standing by the door, still unsure of what she was doing here. "I don't know if I should be here," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I've made so many mistakes, and I don't even know where to start." Eric patted the chair across from him, his gaze warm but unreadable. "We don't have to talk about everything right away. You're here now. That's what matters." Amelia felt herself being pulled in, the tension from earlier in the day dissipating slightly. She took a seat, but the unease still lingered in her chest. She had been running from everything for so long. From the guilt, from the pain of her betrayal, from the confrontation with David that she had yet to face. And now, here she was, in the arms of a man who seemed to offer an escape, yet who, in reality, was part of the very mess she was trying to avoid. "I didn't go back to David," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I couldn't. He told me he didn't know if he could ever forgive me." Eric's eyes softened, though there was a flicker of something else there, something she couldn't quite place. "That's tough," he said, his voice low. "But you know, sometimes people need space to figure things out. You can't fix everything all at once." Amelia nodded, but the doubt crept in. Was that what she wanted, space from David? Or was it just easier to be with someone who didn't expect anything from her? "What if I don't want space?" she asked, her voice cracking with emotion. "What if I just want everything to go back to the way it was? What if I want to undo everything I've done?" Eric's hand reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers in a gesture that felt too intimate, too soon. "You can't undo what's been done, Amelia. But you can decide what comes next. You have that power." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His eyes were calm, but there was an intensity there, an unspoken promise. What did that mean for her? Could she really move forward, leaving everything else behind? Or was she just trying to distract herself from the truth? She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, the door to the cafe opened, and a figure stepped inside. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw him. It was David. Her first instinct was to turn away, to hide, but it was too late. He had already seen her. "Amelia," David said, his voice rough, his eyes dark with exhaustion. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his shoulders heavy with a burden she couldn't bear to imagine. Amelia stood up quickly, her pulse racing. "David, what are you doing here?" He looked between her and Eric, a flicker of recognition passing over his face. I needed to talk to you, he said, his voice quiet but firm. We need to talk, now, not here, not like this. She glanced at Eric, his expression unreadable, before she turned back to David. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, and for a moment, she wasn't sure what to do. Part of her wanted to run, to escape the moment, but another part of her knew that this was it. The moment that would decide everything. Let's go, she said to David, her voice barely a whisper. Eric didn't say anything as she walked past him, but she could feel his eyes on her as she left. David led her outside, the cool air hitting her face as they made their way to his car. The drive to his apartment felt longer than it was, each second dragging as Amelia tried to find the right words. When they finally arrived, David turned to face her as they stepped out of the car. I've been thinking, he said, his voice steady but strained. And I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can go back to the way things were. Amelia's heart dropped, and she fought to hold back tears. David, please, she whispered. Please don't give up on us. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at her, his expression unreadable, his hands clenched at his sides. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, David spoke. I don't know what's left for us, Amelia, but I do know that I can't keep pretending that things are okay. You've broken my trust, and I don't know how to get it back. Amelia's breath hitched as the truth hit her like a wave. She had pushed him too far, and now there was no turning back. She had no excuses, no words that could undo the damage she had caused. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking as the tears began to fall. I never meant for it to happen like this. I never meant to hurt you. But I know I've lost you, I don't know what to do anymore. David stood there, looking at her, his face a mixture of anger and pain. I need time, Amelia. I can't do this right now. Amelia nodded, her chest tight with regret. I understand, she whispered. And with that, David turned away, walking toward the door, leaving her standing in the cold night, alone with her mistakes and the crushing weight of everything she had lost. If you're still with us through this whirlwind of emotions, don't forget to like, share, and comment below about what you think is going to happen next. Your support means the world, so make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter of this heartbreaking journey. The days after that night with David felt like a blur for Amelia. She spent most of her time alone, staring at the walls of her apartment, reflecting on everything she had lost. The silence around her was deafening, and even though she had promised herself she wouldn't let regret swallow her whole, it was becoming harder to fight the weight of what she had done. David had kept his distance. Amelia had sent him a few messages, each one met with silence. Every time she saw his name on her phone, her heart skipped a beat, and she would hesitate, wondering if this was the moment he would reach out. But it never came. The space between them had grown unbearable, and as the days turned into weeks, Amelia began to realize the truth she had been denying all along. She couldn't fix what had been broken, no matter how hard she tried. She couldn't make David trust her again, and she couldn't undo the pain she had caused. But there was one thing she could do. She could change. She could become the person she had always promised herself she would be. The person she had once been with David. Amelia had spent so much time focused on her career, her own ambitions, and her relationship with Eric that she had neglected the one person who had always been there for her. David. She had taken him for granted, assuming he would always be there, no matter how little she gave him in return. And now, she had to live with the consequences of that. One afternoon she gathered her courage and made the decision to visit David. She didn't know if he would be there, or if he would even want to talk to her. But she had to try. She couldn't let this be the end. When she arrived at his apartment, she found the door slightly ajar. Her heart raced as she stepped inside, unsure of what to expect. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. And for a moment, Amelia felt like she was stepping into a memory, a time before everything had gone wrong. David was sitting on the couch, his back to the door. He didn't hear her at first, and for a moment, Amelia considered turning around and leaving. But she didn't. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. "David?" she said softly. He turned around slowly, his eyes meeting hers. There was a long pause, and for the first time in weeks, Amelia felt like she could breathe again. "What are you doing here?" David asked, his voice low. It was clear that he was still hurt, still unsure about everything. But there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I can't make up for what I did. But I've changed. I've spent so much time thinking about everything, and I realize now that I've lost the most important thing in my life. You." David's expression softened slightly, but he didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, as if weighing her words. "I can't promise that things will go back to how they were," she continued, her voice steadying as she spoke. "But I want to try, David. I want to show you that I'm not the person I was, that I can be the woman you deserve." David remained silent for a moment longer, and then he finally spoke. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Amelia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we had." The words cut through her like a knife, but she didn't back down. "I don't want to go back to what we had," she said firmly. "I want something better. I want us to rebuild, to grow together. I want to earn your trust back, David. I can't promise it will be easy, but I'm willing to fight for it." David looked at her, his face still uncertain. But there was a flicker of something, hope, maybe, that she hadn't seen in him for a long time. Slowly, he stood up and walked over to her. For a moment, they just stood there, facing each other, the weight of everything between them. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, finally, his voice softer now, "but I'm willing to try. We can try." Amelia's heart swelled with relief. She knew they had a long road ahead of them, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a chance to make things right. Days turned into weeks, and while things weren't perfect, they were getting better. Amelia and David started to rebuild the connection they had lost, one small step at a time. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the pain of betrayal resurfaced, but they both knew that the road to healing would take time, and that was okay. Amelia had learned a valuable lesson, one that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She had learned that no relationship could survive without trust, and that no matter how hard we try to avoid it, our actions always have consequences. But she had also learned that people could change, that redemption was possible, and that love was worth fighting for. As for Eric, Amelia realized that he had been a distraction, a temporary escape from the problems she didn't want to face. She didn't regret the moments they had shared, but she understood now that they weren't what she truly needed. What she needed was honesty, transparency, and the courage to face the hard truths. In the end, Amelia and David found their way back to each other, not by pretending everything was perfect, but by being real, by acknowledging their mistakes, and by choosing to build something new, something stronger. And with that, Amelia finally understood what it meant to truly love someone. It wasn't about perfection or living in a fantasy. It was about growth, learning from your mistakes, and always being willing to fight for the ones you love. Thank you for sticking with us through this journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the complexities of relationships, choices, and the human heart. Stay tuned for the next chapter in our storytelling journey. You won't want to miss it.